Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Amir Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and we are working our way through the complex sugya of Amir La'akum and all of its ramifications and manifestations. Our learning today should be Eschus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasudim Batzara Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yitziah Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela L'Geul Be'La'ira, U'Mishibur L'Geula, Hashta B'Agala V'Zman Kariv, V'Naimar Amen. So, we begin here on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, a brand new Siman Reish Mem Hey, Yisrael V'Eina Yehudi Shutfin, a Yid and an Eina Yehudi that are partners in a business. Eich Yisnahagu b'Shabbos, how should the Yid comport himself on Shabbos? Ubayvev Seifim, and here we have 6 Seifim. Now, by way of introduction to today's shir, I want to read to you a brisa that's brought down by the Gemara in Masechtas Avodah Zarah on Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph. Says the brisa, Yisrael v'Ovid Kechavim, a Yid and an Eina Yehudi, shekiblu sadeh b'shutfis, that take on a field in a partnership. Now, what does that mean? That means that somebody had a field, and a Yid and an Eina Yehudi take on to work that field as partners, and they are going to be sharecroppers. So the field doesn't really belong to either one of them. The field belongs to a third party. That third party is looking to give out the field to sharecroppers. So Ruvain and Tony take on the field to work the field as sharecroppers, and they are going to be entitled to take a certain percentage of the yield. Now, whatever percent, how does this work? They take on the field as partners. As soon as they take on the field as sharecroppers, they each have immediately accepted upon themselves the obligation to do 50% of the work. And together with that obligation comes the right for each one of them to take 50% of their total portion of the yield of the crop. So the main point that I want to make over here is that immediately upon accepting this field, ba'arisus, and doing it as partners, as soon as they do that, 50% of the work falls on Ruvain, 50% of the work falls on Tony, because they took this on as shutfim. Like Rashi says over here. Rashi says, Umisha kiblua, as soon as they accept the field, hutla al shnehem, it's now an obligation on both of them, lasik ba b'yachad, to work together and to divvy up the work. Okay, says the Brisa, Yisrael v'Ovid Kechavim shekiblu sadeh b'shutvis, lo yoymar Yisrael la'Ovid Kechavim. Reuven cannot now, after they already accepted the field, he cannot now turn to Tony and say, Toil chelkecha b'Shabbos, you accept upon yourself to do all of the Shabbos work. V'ani b'choil, and I will take upon myself to do all of the work of one day of the week. Because, like I said, as soon as they took on this field, it fell upon them to divide up all the work and all the revenue 50-50, right? But now the Yid realizes he has a problem. He can't do work on Shabbos. How's he going to do 50% of the work on Shabbos? He can't do the work on Shabbos. Also, he can't take the revenue of Shabbos. So he can't do the work on Shabbos, and he can't take the revenue on Shabbos. So he turns to Tony, and he says, look, Tony, we'll make a deal. You do all the Shabbos work, and you keep all the Shabbos revenue. I'll do all the Tuesday work, and I will keep all of the Tuesday revenue. This way, the Yid thinks he's going to get himself out of the Shabbos problem. Says the Brisa, you're not allowed to do that. Now, you know why you're not allowed to do it? The reason you're not allowed to do it is very simple. The problem over here is that as soon as they took on the field, Reuven took upon himself an obligation to do that Shabbos work. Now, when he wants to get out of that obligation, what is he doing? Essentially, he's hiring Tony as a shliach, as an employee, to do the work for him. What's he telling Tony? He's telling Tony, really, 50% of the Shabbos work falls on me. I can't work on Shabbos. So you know what? I'm going to hire you. You go ahead and you do the Shabbos work. And you keep 100% of the Shabbos revenue. Now, how am I going to pay you for doing this? Oh, very simple. You have an obligation to do 50% of the Tuesday work. And you're entitled to 50% of the Tuesday revenue. I will do all of your work on Tuesday. So that's how I'm going to pay you. You do my work on Shabbos. I do your work on Tuesday. So what does that mean? That means that Ruvain is hiring Tony to do work on Shabbos. He's making him a shliach to do work on Shabbos. Amir Lakum, it's Aser. So that's the first case over here in the Brisa. So again, the first case is Yisrael v'oivik kechavim shekiblu sada b'shutvis lo yomar Yisrael oivik kechavim tol chelkecha b'Shabbos v'ani b'chol. You can't do that after you already took on the sharecropping job. But v'im hisnu mitchila. But what if they made up this Tanai before they ever accepted the field? So what happened now was Ruvain and Tony saw the ad in the paper together. They said, okay, we're going to call this third party and we'll take on the field as sharecroppers. But now, before they even did it, Ruvain turns to Tony and he says, look, I'm willing to enter into this venture with you, but you have to realize I'm a Torah observant Jew. I cannot work on Shabbos. So the way we're going to have to construct the deal is all the Shabbos work is going to be yours. Now, that's not fair. We're 50-50 partners, so really I should have to do 50% of the Shabbos work. So the way we're going to structure it is very, very simple. All the Shabbos work is going to be yours. All the Tuesday work is going to be mine. Tony says yes. They make the agreement that they're going to enter into the venture in this way. Then they go to the third party and they take on the field as sharecroppers. In that case, says the Brisa, that's mutter. Now, why is that mutter? It's very simple why that's mutter. Because in this case, Ruvain is not making Tony a shliach to do his Shabbos work. In this case, Ruvain never had any Shabbos work. This deal was made before they took on the field as sharecroppers. So when they made this deal, Ruvain did not yet have any obligation to do work on Shabbos. As soon as the deal is struck with the third party and they take on the Sada as sharecroppers, at starting from the first instant of this deal, all of the Shabbos work is Tony's. It never was Ruvain's. So in this case, it's mutter. There's no Amir Lakum. Ruvain never had anything to do with the Shabbos work. It was 100% Tony's from the first second that they entered into this venture. So that, the Brisa says, is mutter. Now the Brisa has a third case. How about if Ruvain never chapped? He never realized that, wait a second, there's a Shabbos problem. So he didn't make the deal before they took on the field as sharecroppers, and he didn't think to make the deal right after they took on the field as sharecroppers. So what happened? What happened was they took on the field as sharecroppers, came the first Shabbos, and Ruvain said, oh, it's Shabbos, I can't work on Shabbos. Tony said, don't worry about it, I'll go to work. I'll take care of it. So now, all the Shabbosos, Tony did all the work on the Shabbosos. All right? Now, it comes the end of the year, comes the end of the season, and they have to divvy up the crop yield. They have to divvy up the revenue from the field. So they sit down, and they say, all right, you know what? You did all the Shabbos work. Yeah, well, you did all the Tuesday work, so we have to figure out how to divvy this up. So the way we'll divvy it up is, you know what, Tony? You take all the Shabbos revenue, I'll take all the Tuesday revenue. So they're not making the Tanai until all the way at the end where they actually divvy up the revenue of the Sada. In that case, says the Brisa, the imbol cheshbon, if they don't make the Tanai until all the way at the end, when they're making an accounting and they're actually divvying up the proceeds, Aser. That's also Aser. Rashi says, why is that Aser? Because he says, the goli daitoi, the ovikechavim shluchaya. Because now, if you make this division of the revenue all the way at the end, what are you showing? You are now showing that when Tony did the Shabbos work, he was acting as Ruvain's shliach. Beharaya, how are the funds being divvied up? The way the funds are being divvied up is Tony's taking all the Shabbos revenue, and Ruvain is taking all the Tuesday revenue. So by the virtue of the fact that the chalukah is being made that way, you now are showing that in fact Tony was always a shliach of Ruvain's. So the Brisa says that that's also aser. Then the Brisa has one more case. The last case is a little bit different than the third case. The last case is they never made it tonight. They didn't make it tonight before they took on the field. They didn't make it tonight after they took on the field. They didn't make it tonight b'shas chalukah. The only thing that happened was for the entire season, Tony always did the work on Shabbos. Nothing was ever spoken about. And then when they sat down to do the accounting and divvy up the proceeds, Reuven and Tony both said, well, we've been 50-50 partners. So since we're 50-50 partners, we're going to divvy up 50%. And no mention is made of who did the work on Shabbos, who did the work on Tuesday. However, it fell out. And when it came time to make the division, it was like a given. What do you mean? We've always been 50-50 partners. We're going to divvy up 50-50. On that, the Gemara has a shaila. The Gemara says, what's the halacha then? Iboyalu, stamamai. What happens if it was never spoken about? Is it mutter for the yid to take 50% of the revenue? Or do we say that by taking 50% of the revenue, he's taking schar Shabbos? And maybe by taking 50% of the revenue, he's saying ipso facto that Tony was his shliach to work on Shabbos. And that is an iboya delay ifshita. The Gemara does not rule what the halacha is in that case. It remains an iboya delay ifshita. For the Gemara, we don't have an answer. So that's the brisa in Masechet Avodah Zarah. And that lays the groundwork for what we're going to see here in this Siman. So, says the Machaber, Sif Aleph, Zayin Amud Aleph. Yisrael ve'ena Yehudi sheyesh lahem sada oy tanur oy merchatz oy rechaim shalmayim b'shutfis. You have Yisrael, a Yid, and an Eina Yehudi, and they have a partnership in a field, or they own a bakery oven in a joint partnership, or they own a merchatz, a bathhouse in a joint partnership, oy rechaim shalmayim, or they have a water-driven grain mill b'shutfis. But whatever it is, they have one of these types of businesses, and they own it as a joint venture, as a shutfis. Or perhaps, says the Mechaber, Shem shutfin b'chanus b'schayra. Or maybe they're partners in a store. They're merchants, and they have a store as a partnership where they sell inventory. Says the Mechaber, Im hisnu b'tchila. If they make a tanai up front, before they ever enter into the partnership, Im hisnu b'tchila b'shah shabo l'ishtatef. If they make a tanai koidem lamaisa, if they set a condition before they ever enter into the partnership, sheyes chara Shabbos la'ena Yehudi levadoi, that all of the Shabbos revenue is going to belong to the Eina Yehudi, im ma'at ve'im harbe, whether it's a lot or whether it's a little, usachar yoim echad keneged yoim haShabbos liYisrael levadoi, and 100% of the revenue of a different day of the week is going to belong 100% to the Yid, then mutter. Then this arrangement is mutter. So what the Mechaber just told us, the second ruling of the Brisa in Avodah Zarah. And let's put it into very simple terms. Let's take one of the cases over here from the Mechaber. You have Ruvain and Tony. They want to go ahead and they want to buy a hardware store together as a joint venture. So before they sit down and close the deal with the person who's selling the hardware store, Ruvain turns to Tony and says, realize, I can't work on Shabbos. I can't have a business making money for me on Shabbos. That would be the Yisra Schar Shabbos. I can't have you run the store on Shabbos on my behalf. That would be Amir Alakum. So what I need to do is I need to divest myself from this business for Shabbos. How am I going to do that? The deal that I'm going to make with you, Tony, is The business is yours on Shabbos. You get 100% of the revenue from Shabbos. You do 100% of the work on Shabbos. This business is yours on Shabbos. If a lot of people want to do work in their houses over the weekend, and there's a lot of business on Shabbos, you're going to get all the Shabbos business. And if there's a lot of Shabbos business, and it's a lot more than the Tuesday business, you're going to make out like a bandit. Because you're going to get all the Shabbos business, I'm going to get all the Tuesday business. And Tony says, okay. And then they go and they close the deal. So you know what happened over here? Reuven never had any ownership of this business on Shabbos. He never had an obligation to do any work in the business on Shabbos. He was never entitled to any revenue that the business generates on Shabbos. Nothing to do with him. Tony goes, he opens up the hardware store on Shabbos, he keeps all the revenue on Shabbos, he's doing it 100% for himself. It has nothing to do with Reuven. That's what the Mechaber is telling me here. Now that's all the Mechaber for today on the Dirshu schedule. Now let's go into the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mishnah Berurah gives us a very nice hakdama over here, and based on what I read to you from the Brisa and Avodah Zarah, it's going to flow very, very simply. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yisrael the Eina Yehudi, a Yid and an Eina Yehudi that have a shutfus in a business. Da, you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim. Haheter gomer hu, the way to do this in a way that's 100% mutter is Be'ima Yisrael yesh lo eze esekoi malacha b'shutfus imayina Yehudi. If a Yid has any kind of business in a joint partnership with an Eina Yehudi, sheyasnu mitchila, they should make a t'nai koidim l'maisa. They should make a condition up front. Koidim shaloichin b'shutfus, before they buy the business as a joint venture. Avoid ata b'Shabbos, the Yid should tell the Nachri, you do all the work on Shabbos, v'tikach kefi malachtecha, and you're doing all the work, so in exchange for doing all the work on Shabbos, you're going to take all of the revenue, hein rav oimat, whether a lot of revenue is generated on Shabbos, or a little revenue is generated on Shabbos. You're going to do all the Shabbos work, you're going to keep all the Shabbos revenue. Va'ani, and me, says the Yid, avoid kinegdecha, I'm going to work against that, yom echad b'chol, one complete day during the week. So Tuesday is going to be mine. I'm going to do all the work on Tuesday, ve'etel kifi malachti, and I'm going to keep all of the Tuesday work. So it's a fair deal. They're making a fair deal. They're exchanging days, and it's being made up front so that Reuven never had a shaykhis to the Shabbos business, because this deal was made, this t'nai was made before they entered into the partnership, before they owned the business. So at no point was the malacha of Shabbos mutal on the Yisrael. It was never on him. He never had an obligation to work on Shabbos. So you can't possibly say that Reuven is making Tony a shliach to do his work on Shabbos. It's not my work. It never was my work. The Shabbos work never had any shaykhs to me. Ubishas chaluka, and then when it comes time to make an accounting and divide up the revenue of the business, yitar la'eni Yehudi schar avor Shabbos, the Eina Yehudi is going to take all of the Shabbos revenue, va'Yisrael yiten yom echad kenegdo hen rav amat, and the Yid is going to take all of the Tuesday revenue. And they're going to do this, they're not going to say, oh, it's not fair. However it falls out, it falls out. Tony is going to get all the Shabbos revenue, hein rav oimaat, and Reuven is going to get all the Tuesday revenue, hein rav oimaat. Aval, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, im lo yihisnu mitchila, if they don't make this t'nai up front before they enter into the venture, ubishas chaluka, and it's only at the time that they come to divvy up the revenue, and now the Yehudi suddenly realize, oh, wait a second, I have a problem here. If at that time, if now he wakes up and he says, you know what, you go ahead, you take all the Shabbos revenue, I'll take all the Tuesday revenue. Zeu vadei aser. That was the case in the Brisa where we said, in bo lecheshbon, if you go ahead and you wake up, if Reuven wakes up to make this division only at the end of the season when they're going to divide the revenue, And now suddenly Reuven turns to Tony and says, I can't be taking any of the Shabbos revenue because I have a halacha problem. Schar Shabbos. You know what? You did the work on Shabbos. You take Shabbos' revenue. I'll take Tuesday's revenue. So now it comes out, Lemafreya, retroactively, we see that really what was happening all along was that when Tony was opening the hardware store on Shabbos, he was acting as Reuven's employee. And Reuven was paying him back by doing the Tuesday work and getting the Tuesday revenue. And if they didn't make this tonight up front, if this tonight was never spoken about, and just the assumption always was we're 50% partners, so at the end of the season or whenever, at the end of the fiscal year, when it's time to make the division, they just divide up 50-50 because we're 50-50 partners, so it's never spoken about. Zeu b'ya Gemara. This is a shaila in the Gemara. V'loy ifshita. And from the Gemara, it is not clear what the psak halacha is. Now, the two tzadim over there are very simple. The tzad to say that it's aser is, again, the same thing that we saw before. It could be if at the end of the fiscal year, they go divide up the revenue 50-50, even though it was never spoken about, but if they divided up 50-50, so then Igloi Milsalam Afreya, we see retroactively that Tony was always acting as an employee of Reuven's. Or maybe you say, no, it was never spoken about. Nobody ever arranged it that way. I never asked him to work on Shabbos. Now we're splitting 50-50, but it's not clear that there was an employee arrangement over here, so maybe it should be mutter. Pasuk Rambam l'chumra. The Rambam paskins l'chumra that this is aser. V'harosh l'kula. The Rosh paskins that you could be makel. V'hamechaber sasam ka Rambam. We're going to see tomorrow Shibir Tzashem that the mechaber is going to paskin like the Rambam. V'haramah pasak b'hagol ka Rosh. And the Ramah is going to paskin like the Rosh. But malkam hefsid gadol, at least if it's a case of a hefsid meruba. We'll see more about this tomorrow. And if they go ahead and they make the Tanai up front, so they did the right thing. And they made the Tanai before they went into the business venture. So again, they did the right thing. Before they bought the hardware store together, Reuven turned to Tony and he made the Tanai the way he's supposed to. You take the Shabbos business, I take the Tuesday business. Then at the end of the fiscal year, they sit down and they make a cheshbon. And it turns out that the situation is lopsided. Either Shabbos made very little money and Tuesday made a lot of money, or maybe the other way. Maybe Shabbos made a lot of money because that's the time that the do-it-yourselfers are busy over the weekend, and Tuesday made very little money. So whatever it is, they sit down to make the chalukah, and they see it's lopsided. And nisratzu lach like b'shaveh. So they look at each other and say, come on, we know we had to make that deal because of Shabbos, but we're good buddies, and we were always 50% partners. Let's just call it a day and divide it equally. Zeu mutter afla Rambam. We're going to see in B'Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow's share that even the Rambam would hold that this is mutter u'kamoshe kasav b'siv beis. Zeu ikre adinim shabasifim harishonim. This is the underpinnings of the halachas that we're going to see in the first couple of seifim in this siman, the yeser pratim and the additional details, the gam ta'amein and the rationale for each halacha, yavayaru l'kabei, will be clarified and explained as we go further. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. So, the Mechaber said over here, Yavi Yisrael and Eina Yehudi, they have a joint venture. They own either a field or a baking oven, maybe a bathhouse, maybe a mill, maybe a store. They have it in a partnership. Okay, the Mechaber said they have to make a condition up front, where it's made clear up front that the Shabbos business belongs to the Eina Yehudi. So the Eina Yehudi does the Shabbos work, the Eina Yehudi does the Shabbos gets the Shabbos revenue. There's no Amira La'akum, because I'm not making him a shliach to do my Shabbos work. The Shabbos work never had anything to do with me. There's no schar Shabbos. I'm not taking the revenue on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah ois katnal sada oitamer. Tam advarim elu debe'inon hisnu. What is the problem over here? Why do we need this Tanai? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Di'elav hachi, if you don't make this Tanai before you enter into the venture, kevan demitchila b'shas asiyas hashutfus. Since at the beginning, right when you enter into this joint venture, hayamutal hamalacha al shneihem yachtav, as soon as you buy the hardware store as 50% partners, at that instant it becomes that each one of you is obligated to do 50% of the work. Ulahachi, therefore, im akakach yoimar lo ena Yehudi. If now, after you entered into the venture, the Yisrael would turn to the ena Yehudi and he would say to him, Asay atolavatcha b'Shabbos, you, Tony, do all the Shabbos work. V'toilecha kol harevach shel Shabbos, and you keep all the revenue of Shabbos. V'ani, and I, Ruvain, es elevadi yom echad b'chayil kenegdoi, I will reciprocate by doing all of the work one day during the week, let's say Tuesday, ve'etol oisay la'atzmi harevach shel oisay yom, and I'll keep all the revenue of Tuesday. So what does that equal? Hevele, this is very simply put, ki'ilu maimidisa eni Yehudi l'poyel biyadayim. Essentially what Reuven is doing is, he's hiring Tony as an employee to cover his work on Shabbos. We went into this venture. I, Reuven, became obligated to do 50% of the Shabbos work. I can't do it. So what am I doing? I'm hiring you, Tony. You do my portion of the Shabbos work. How am I going to pay you back? I'm going to do your portion of the Tuesday work. So, ki'ilu oimaloi, I say, ata avuri b'Shabbos. It's as if Reuven is telling Tony, you work for me on Shabbos. You cover my obligations on Shabbos. V'ani es neged zeh, and I will compensate you avurcha b'chol. I'll do your work during the week. V'evishluchai mamish. In that case, it's Amir La'aka 101. What Reuven is doing is, he's making Tony a shliach to cover his Shabbos obligations. Amir Lakum, that would be awesome. And he brings this down from Tosfos over there in Avodah Zarah. Ulefizeh, and according to this, says the Chavetz Chaim, let's tweak the case a little bit. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Im shutfai ha'ene Yehudi ba'atzmai ene oisa klum. Let's give an example. Let's say, this is the example the Chavetz Chaim is going to use. Let's say Reuven and Tony, they don't have a store together. They own a baking oven together as a joint venture. So, what we've just said here now is, if let's say the situation was that they own a baking oven together as a joint venture, and each day, or for 50% of the time, each one of them goes, fires up the oven, and bakes bread, and maybe they sell bread. Maybe they're bakers, right? So in that case, what's going to happen on Shabbos? So we said the deal that you have to make is Reuven has to tell Tony, Shabbos is yours. You're going to do the baking. You're going to fire up the oven on Shabbos. You're going to keep all of Shabbos' revenue. I'm going to do Tuesday. I divested myself of the Shabbos work, of the Shabbos business. I have nothing to do with the oven, with the bakery on Shabbos. It's all yours. Fine. He took care of his problem. If he doesn't do that, if instead what happens is they make the Tanai after they bought the oven together, after Reuven already had an obligation to do 50% of the baking on Shabbos, if now Reuven would tell Tony, oh, I just realized I have a problem, you cover Shabbos, that would be Aser. Why is it Aser? Because he's making Tony a shliach to do his Shabbos work. So now when Tony goes and opens the bakery and fires up the oven, he's doing Reuven's work. Amir La'aka 101, it's Aser. But now let's tweak the case. Let's say nobody's doing any baking. Let's say instead what's going to happen is like this. On Shabbos, we open up the oven to the public. What does that mean? We don't do any baking on Shabbos. We rent out the oven. We make it available for rental by the public. So if somebody has challah that they want to bake, somebody has bread that they want to bake for the week, they come, they pay us, and they fire up the oven, and they do the work. So we're not doing any work. So now, what's going to happen? Reuven and Tony bought this bakery b'shutfus. They didn't make the Tanai up front. They're making the Tanai only after they bought the bakery. Now, Reuven turns around to Tony, and he says, I have a Shabbos problem. I can't fire up the oven on Shabbos. Tony says, what's the problem? You're not firing up the oven on Shabbos? I'm not firing up the oven on Shabbos. We're letting other Einam Yehudim come. they are going to pay a rental and they're going to fire up the oven. Now, who's going to stand at the door and collect the rental? Tony's going to stay at the door and he's going to collect the payment. But he's not going in to fire up the oven. He's not doing any baking. He's not doing the malacha with the oven. These other Einam Yehudim that are coming to rent out the oven, they're the ones that are doing it. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, l'chayra, there's no problem. Why? Because who's doing malacha as a shliach of Ruvain? Nobody. Nobody's doing malacha as a shliach of Ruvain. If Thomas comes and he pays $50 to rent the oven for a few hours, and he bakes challah, he makes bread, it's mamach nachri adaited than avshei. He's not doing it as a shliach of Ruvain. He has nothing to do with Ruvain. He never met Ruvain. He never spoke to Ruvain. He's coming to a place where you can rent an oven so he can bake bread for the week, and he's paying $50 for the ability to bake the bread. He's not acting as a shliach of Ruvain's. So let's see this inside. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ulafizeh, according to this explanation, Im shutfaya eni Yehudi ba'atzmai eno isa klum. Let's say Tony is not going to do anything on Shabbos. Rak she'enam Yehudim acherim abam lefois maisikin by betanu shalosh shutvis v'noisin sach ma b'scharam. Instead, what's happening is other Einam Yehudim are coming. They're paying a rental fee for the ability to use the oven, and they're baking bread. In that case, Yachala Yisrael lekabel mishutfais charei hamagia lo lefi chelkai. In that case, Ruvain is allowed to go ahead and divvy up all the profits of the bakery 50-50 equal with Tony. He's even allowed to take 50% of the revenue that came in on Shabbos. Afilu im loy hisnu. They don't have to make it tonight at all in this case. The only thing is, we have a schar Shabbos problem. Remember what was said all along. A Yid's not allowed to have a business generating money for him on Shabbos. Now, in this case, Ruvain owns 50% of that bakery oven, which is being rented out to Einam Yehudim on Shabbos. Money is coming in, so Ruvain's making money. But we know what the way around that is. The way around that is Havlah. The way around Schar Shabbos is always Havlah. So when they divvy up the revenue of the business, Ruvain is not going to take isolated Shabbos revenue. They're going to divide up all the revenue. Ruvain, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. So the Shabbos revenue, the Schar Shabbos, is going to be Muvla in the rest of the week. So that's Havlah. So there's no Schar Shabbos. Now, you might say, maybe there's a risk of Marasayan, because Tony is standing by the door and he's getting the rental money. The Einam Yehudim are coming in to fire up the oven and use their oven, right? They're coming and they're dealing with Tony. So maybe people are going to say, oh, Tony is Ruvain Shliach to run the business on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we're not going to get into a Marasayan problem here. We're not going to worry about that. They're not going to say Tony is doing it for Ruvain. They know that Tony is a proprietor over here. So Tony is not He's not working for Ruvain. So to tie up, kind of recap this last case that the Mishnah Berurah said, it's a very interesting case. The case over here is, if they're renting out the baking oven to the public, so that Einam Yehudim come, they pay a rental fee, they bake in the oven. In that case, Ruvain doesn't have to make any kind of tanai with anybody. Ruvain could actually own 50% of the bakery oven on Shabbos. He doesn't have to divest himself from the business at all. Why? Because there's no Amir al-Akum. Where should the Amir al-Akum be? Thomas and John and Peter that are coming to bake their bread in this oven that Ruvain and Tony own as a joint shutfus, they're not acting as shluchim for Ruvain. Ruvain's not getting anything out of the work that they're doing. They're baking their own bread, and they're paying for the right to bake their bread. They're doing it for themselves. They're not acting as a shliach for Ruvain. Who could possibly be acting as a shliach for Ruvain? The only one that could possibly be working as a shliach for Ruvain is Tony, who's standing there and quote-unquote minding the store. But he's also working for himself. He has a 50% interest in this. So he's working for himself. What's the problem? Schar Shabbos? There's no Schar Shabbos problem. We're going to have Havlah. Okay. Ice cotton base. So the Mechaber said the eighth over here is you have to make the Tanai up front. Im hisnu mitchila, says the Mishnah Berurah. Hatam, the reason why a Tanai up front before they ever enter into the venture works is the kevet hisnu mitchila, because since they make the Tanai up front, loihut al Yisrael klal mei karalasis b'Shabbos. Since the Tanai is being made up front, there was never any obligation on Ruvain to do any work on Shabbos, because he divested himself of that obligation before he ever got it. The Tanai up front was, I will never have a Shabbos obligation. If Ruvain never had a Shabbos obligation, Tony can't be covering his non-existent Shabbos obligation as his shliach. He never had a Shabbos obligation. Ve'eina Yehudi shlucha, ve'eina Yehudi shlucha. Ois cotton gimel, sheyeh schar HaShabbos. The Mechaber said that part of the deal is that the Ein Yehudi is going to keep all of the Shabbos revenue. Now, the Chavetz Chaim points out a technical difficulty. The technical difficulty is one of the businesses that the Mechaber mentions over here is a field. Now, let's say we're talking about a hardware store. When we're talking about a hardware store, it's very easy to isolate Shabbos' revenue. You have a good bookkeeper. A good bookkeeper keeps track how much money came in on Shabbos, how much money came in on Sunday. So now you made a deal. Shabbos belongs 100% to Tony. He does all the Shabbos work. He keeps all the Shabbos revenue. We could very easily isolate Shabbos' revenue, and we can make sure that Tony gets all the Shabbos revenue, and we can make sure that Ruvain will get all the Tuesday revenue. But what happens by a field? By a field, there's no such thing as Shabbos revenue and Tuesday revenue. A field, there's work that has to be done. So there might be plowing that has to be done on Shabbos. So you'll turn around and you'll say, Tony, you have to do all the Shabbos' work. But now, how do you also have to isolate the Shabbos revenue. You also have to say that the whole business belongs to Tony on Shabbos, and that's why Tony's doing all the Shabbos work, and Tony's also getting all the Shabbos revenue. But there's no Shabbos revenue. At the end of the season, you harvest the field, and the field yields a crop, and the crop is worth money. But that yield was generated by the work that was done on all the days of the week. So how do you isolate Shabbos revenue? So says the Mishnah Berurah, Sheyeh schar Shabbos, is cutting gimel. The gabi sadeh, you know what you have to do by a field? The gabi sadeh tzarich sheyomer aloi. You have to make up a deal like this, and you have to say to Tony, Tamoil lizroya v'lachroish b'Shabbos. You do all the plowing work, all the planting work, whatever field work has to be done on Shabbos, you do. V'titel b'shas ketzira, and at the time of the harvest, when we bring in the yield, you take kigneged amolcha b'Shabbos. We're going to make up a price. What we're going to do is we're going to say, all the Shabbos work is on you. And remember, we're doing this before we ever buy the field. So we'll make up front, Tony, all the Shabbos work is on you. Now, wait a second. If all the Shabbos work is on me, what do I get for it? Oh, what you get for it is you're going to get paid. From the proceeds of the business, from the revenue that the field is going to yield, since all the Shabbos work belonged to you, you're going to be entitled to compensation. So you're going to get extra money. We're not going to divide up the revenue of the field 50-50. You're going to get an extra percentage in turn for the work that belonged to you, all the Shabbos work. You have to get paid for that. You have to make money. If all the Shabbos work belonged to you, you did more work. So you have to make more. So fine. So you're going to get more from the yield. Vani oishluchi, and Ruvain says, me or my shliach, Emo b'chol, will do all the Tuesday work, ve'etol gamke keneged yom sheli, and I'll get extra compensation. I'll take an extra piece of the pie when we divvy up the revenue for my Tuesday work that I owed and you don't. Ice cut and dalit, they have to split this up so that Tony gets all the Shabbos revenue, whether it's a lot or a little. Reuven gets all the Tuesday revenue, whether it's a lot or a little. Imad, because now, you see, if the deal would be made up and it would say, listen, Tony, Shabbos belongs to you, Tuesday belongs to me. But we're really 50-50 partners. And a lot of DIYers, they come to the hardware store a lot on Shabbos. So Shabbos is going to make a lot more money than Tuesday. So we're going to fudge the numbers Tuesday, Tony. So even though Shabbos belongs to you and you're going to make a lot of money on Shabbos, Tuesday belongs to me. Tuesday's not a big day in the hardware store. We're going to fudge the numbers and we're still going to go ahead and divvy up 50-50. You can't do that because that shows that it's a joke. That shows that Shabbos did not belong to Tony. You're also taking your piece of the pie on Shabbos. That's why it has to be im ma'at im harbe. It has to be Shabbos is Tony's. So Tony gets Shabbos' revenue, whether it's a lot or a little. Tuesday is Reuven's. So Tuesday gets Reuven gets Tuesday's revenue, whether it's a lot or a little. That's what the Mishnah Berurah speaks out here. Now that you see that they're not divvying up equally, that's how you see that they really were not partners on Shabbos and they really were not partners on Tuesday. Because they're dividing, he's keeping Shabbos, whether it's a lot or a little, he's keeping Tuesday, whether it's a lot or a little. That shows that they were never partners. Rak b'shar hayomim. They're only partners Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tuesday and Shabbos, they're not partners. Ula afuke, this stands in contrast to imasti imoy b'shasa tonight. If they make the tonight up front before they buy the store, wink, wink, they go ahead and they say, Tony, Shabbos is all yours. And Reuven, Tuesday is all mine. But don't worry, at the end of the day, we're going to split 50-50. If they would do that, if they make up front when they make the tonight, don't worry, at the end of the day, we'll wink, wink, split 50-50. Aser, that's aser. Because then you're just showing that really you were shutfim on Shabbos. You're just, you're filling out the paperwork. You're trying to get out of the technicality. No, can't be that way. Now, how about if they do everything properly? They make the Tanai up front before they enter into the venture the way they were supposed to. They make the proper Tanai. Shabbos is all Tony's. Tuesday is all Reuven's. Then, they sit down and they do the accounting. They sit down with the bookkeeper or with the accountant and they see how it fell out. So, how much did you get? Ata Meruba, you got a lot, Vanimuat, I got a little. All right, what's the difference? Okay, over the course of the year, you made $25,000 more than me. No, not like Hamoiser. Let's take that $25,000 difference and let's divvy it up. Shi'il b'shava. Let's balance it out now. Okay, we made the Tanai the way we were supposed to make the Tanai. We did the work the way we were supposed to do the work. Tony did all the Shabbos work. Reuven did all the Tuesday work. At the end of the fiscal year, we sat down with the accountants. We went through the books the way we were supposed to. We assigned all of the Shabbos money to Tony. We assigned all the Tuesday money to Reuven. We finished. Okay, you got your check. I got my check. How did you make out? How did it work out? Oh, wow. Reuven, I see you really got killed. I see that, me, Tony, I picked up all the Shabbos stuff, to help you out with your Shabbos problem. But I see you really got killed. I made $25,000 more than you. I really feel bad about that. You know what? I want to be a nice guy. Let's divvy it up. I want things to be even between us. I don't want it to be a lopsided deal. I don't want us, we're partners. I don't want you walking around that you got the short end of the stick. So if they say now, Nak like a moiser sheyil ishtan b'shaveh, das hamagen Avram lifsei kedas arrived. We said that this is an aboya delivsha to the Gemara. So it says that the opinion of the Magen Avram is to paskin like the Ravid, Shemachmir bazeh. The Ravid says you can't do this. This is just like the case before. Now, I want to stress, there's a difference between the two cases. The case before was wink, wink. The case before was, Tony, you keep Shabbos. Me, I'm going to keep Tuesday. Well, we sit down with the accountant. Yeah, I know we made that deal, but we're 50-50 partners. I mean, come on. Don't worry. At the end of the day, we're 50-50. So that's a wink, wink. That's harama. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. That's that case. This case really wasn't wink, wink. This case we did everything Kedasu Kedin. But then when they divvied up the money and they saw that it was lopsided, they agreed, you know what, we don't want it to come out this way. Let's do it shava b'shava. Even in that case, the Magen Avram is machmer like the Ravid, and he says, Bishum digloi milsalam afred, that tonight de meikara harama. He says, we can't let you do this. Because the bottom line is, if at the end of the day, you do walk out shava b'shava, then it mamish looks like harama. It mamish looks like it was wink wink. And we can't have that. V'yesh b'kilin bazeh, but there are those that makel, and they say, kevid dehistu meikara, since they did make the proper tanai up front, and they actually did do the division, and it's only later that they went and wanted to make it shava b'shava, there are those that are makel. V'ayin bel Yerabah sherech gam kein bazeh ulebesayf nishar b'tzarachian, the El Yerabah blibes by its tzarachian. Oiskat vav mutter. How about another case? Another problem. Let's go back to the hardware store case. You did everything the way you were supposed to do. Ruvain made up with Tony. Tony, all of the Shabbos revenue from the hardware store is going to be yours. The hardware store business is yours on Shabbos. You're going to do the work. You're going to keep the revenue. I never had anything to do with it. We made this tonight up front. Tuesday is all mine. Tony, you have nothing to do with Tuesday. They did mamish everything right. Then at the end of the fiscal year, they sit down together with the accountant to make up the chalukah, to divide the revenue. So they look at the accountant and they tell the accountant, so you remember that before we entered into this business venture, Tony and I made up that Shabbos is his and Tuesday is mine. And the accountant looks at them with a blank stare and says, gentlemen, that's not the way I kept the books. I can't isolate Shabbos' revenue. I'm sorry, we just didn't keep the books that way. And now it's too late. It's after the fact. There's nothing for me to do. I can't rebuild it. We don't have the receipts, whatever it is. There's no way for me to rebuild and isolate what was Shabbos' revenue. What do you do now? Is the Yid allowed to take the Shabbos revenue? Or do we say that he has a Schar Shabbos problem? Do we say Gloi Milsalam Afred that there's an Amir La'akum problem? Says the Mishnah Berurah, if there's no way to calculate it, like by a store, and the accounting wasn't done that way, Rashan l'chatchila lachlik b'shaveh. The Magen Avram says in the name of the Rabach that post facto b'di'evid they could go ahead and they could divide up b'shaveh. They did everything that they were supposed to do. They made all the tanoim that they were supposed to make. Now there's a problem. The problem boils down to a suffix. What's the suffix? I don't know what the Shabbos revenue was. I don't know if I'm supposed to take more money, if I'm supposed to take less money. You're not mechuyev to let Tony walk away with more money because of the suffix, and therefore this is going to be mutter. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. This listen to Liman HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should say, Yeshua and first Parnasset should do to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yas Kal Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.